All roads lead to Moscow in the next couple of weeks, although no roads from Moscow have been afforded in the celebration of the defeat of Hitler fascism. I think that's what they'll be celebrating in Germany itself, in Berlin. The flags of all of the Nazi allied countries will be flying, but the flag of the country that liberated Berlin, liberated the Germans, lifted the iron heel of Hitler fascism off the necks of millions of people across occupied Europe, that will not be allowed. I'm actually not worried, because Gayatri and I, God willing, will be in Moscow, where the real celebration of the great victory of the wartime alliance in 1945 will be. And if I'm lucky, I'll be meeting Chay Bowes there on Red Square. Chay, welcome. I very much look forward to meeting you there in Moscow. Give us, before we move on to other subjects, give us some idea of the sense of anticipation for the Victory Day celebration that must already be mounting in Russia.
Yeah, George, hopefully I'll see you there and we'll raise a glass, please God. Well, of course, one of the things that you notice and you realize that living among the Russians and having lived here for many years now is just how important Victory Day is, May the 9th, and how it's a living history. There's not a single person that you'll meet in Russia or any of the constituent 15 republics that made up the Soviet Union who didn't have some connection, really, particularly in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, to the war, to the great patriotic war as it's known in Russia. The sacrifice was immense. Around 27 million people, we don't know exactly how many, but at least 27 million, 13 million combatants who died fighting the greatest invasion force, the greatest army ever assembled in history, which rolled over the borders into the Soviet Union in 1941. The horror of the war is very much alive in Russia. People remember it. If there's anyone who knows war on earth, it's the Russians. And that was obviously something that was underestimated by the West in their proxy war against Russia. Interestingly, today, church bells rang across the Kursk region in Russia, well, the small part of the Kursk region that was occupied temporarily by Vladimir Zilinski's forces, completely driven out at huge cost to the Kiev dictatorship. So the bells rang. Little Victory Day was called by the head of the church in Kursk. It's a living history. And many of the people who march on Red Square, some veterans of the special military operation, as it's known in Russia, will have grandfathers, great-grandfathers who fought in Germany and across the Soviet Union to push the Nazis back into the Wolf's Lair, into Berlin, finally raising the flag above the Reichstag. Actually, one of the men who raised that flag's great-grandson is currently fighting in the SMO. So this is a living history. It's very much part of the fabric. It's a very somber time in Russia where people remember the immortal battalion. People take out photographs. They celebrate this sacrifice. And among the people celebrating, of course, the sacrifice will be Vladimir Putin. His own family in what was then known as Leningrad, St. Petersburg now, suffered terribly. His own brother died in 1941 from diphtheria. His family, his uncle died on the front fighting. They lived through this horrific siege of Leningrad, where untold numbers of people died. It was a horrific, horrific time. Eagerly aided, by the way, by the Finns, who also committed terrible atrocities. You mentioned the fact that people who collaborated with the Nazis, flags will be flown. The Finns, operating concentration camps in places like Karelia for women and children. There's a hidden history here, which is being erased and reversed out of currently by the European Union and NATO, that, and that the Soviets were some sort of monster that had to be pushed back, and that licensed things like the Ukrainian collaboration, the Finnish collaboration. And that's a very, very pernicious thing. And that makes May the 9th in Russia all the more important. It doesn't fade with time. It grows in significance, if you like.
The Zhukov, the great military commander of the siege and defeat of Hitler in Berlin, and who gave the first address declaring the Great Patriotic War over in a speech that will raise the hair on the back of any sane person's neck at the first victory celebrations. He said, "We have liberated the people of Europe from fascism, but they will never forgive us." It's turned out that way, isn't it? Russia has turned into the elephant in the room that cannot be mentioned. They commemorate the liberation of Auschwitz without the presence of the people who liberated Auschwitz. And they include representatives of the countries that owned, built, and operated Auschwitz. I mean, it's Kafkaesque, really, Chay.
Yeah, George, absolutely. And it kind of demonstrates this erasure of history. The idea that somewhere like Auschwitz, which was liberated by the Red Army, and again, the Red Army constituted probably out of 60% of the men in the Red Army were Russian. And about 75% of the fighting ability of this massive army, the Great Blonde Witch, as it was known in Belarus and Russia, as it rolled across the plains, massacring people, entire villages, barns filled with children and women. The horrors were unspeakable. This massive army that rolled across the plains of Ukraine as well. Remember, millions of Ukrainians died. Millions of Ukrainians fought against the Nazis, including Vladimir Zilinski's grandfather, who was awarded the Order of the Red Banner himself. Imagine what he'd think right now of his grandson. So this is all part of the erasure. The perpetrators of the mass murder of untold numbers of Jews, Poles, Gypsies, homosexuals, any intellectuals that were opposed to the Nazi regime, the perpetrators, the people who built the camp, the client labor, the people who propped up the regime are all going to be represented and have been represented at Auschwitz. Meanwhile, on Liberation Day, the liberators are excluded because of this agreed truth, this singular, agreed, manipulated truth that Russia, posed some sort of threat to Europe, which is utterly ridiculous. And that was also suggested in a great article by Peter Hitchens in the Daily Mail, of all places, an acceptance that we've been lied to about Russia. The EU and NATO being the military wing of the European Union under Ursula von der Leyen and these devout Russophobes like Kaja Kallas, exceptionally incapable people, leading the European Union towards the precipice of a war of distraction because of their gross political failures in their own countries. Mr. Starmer, of course, hot on their heels. They need this fear. All fear is required to predicate the build-up of 800 billion euros worth of euros that the hard-pressed taxpayers of Europe have absolutely no way to pay. So it's a war of distraction. And part of that has to be the absolute demonization of Russia. But Russia was not the Soviet Union, much as NATO was formed to counter the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed or was destroyed, as some scholars would suggest, in 1991, the Warsaw Pact, the balancing piece on the seesaw from NATO, the Warsaw Pact expanded alongside the Soviet Union and alongside all aggressive intentions towards the West if they ever existed. NATO, on the other hand, expanded. And in order for that expansion, you need an enemy. We've been told since the 1970s that the Soviets were coming. We're now being told that the Russians are coming. There's no sentient or plausible objective evidence of either of those things ever existing, and it certainly doesn't exist now. But it's all about maintaining this war of distraction to avoid real scrutiny of the corruption in the EU, the uselessness of NATO, and the aggressive nature of NATO. Tell anybody in Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq, Syria, and Serbia, where I've got a lot of good friends, that NATO is a defensive alliance, and they will laugh in your face. It's necessary to continue the demonization of Russia, and this is all an integral part of reverse engineering some sort of heroism into countries like Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, who actively collaborated with the Nazis in the rounding up, execution of Jews and other undesirables, as they were known.
Now, in like a scene from Godfather 4, thank God they never made it, we had Donald Trump and little Zilinski drawing up a chair in one of the anterooms of St. Peter's at the Vatican on Saturday. What do you think the two were saying to each other?
Well, I think the first thing that's obvious is that this wasn't instigated by Trump or the Trump administration. Trump's been very clear about his view of Vladimir Zelensky. He dislikes this man intently, and he's made no bones about that in his tweets and in his statements. So it was something that happened at the instigation, I think, of the other attendees here, the Europeans who've been left outside the room as Russia and America talk to each other. The Europeans talk to themselves, and they're getting increasingly worried at their irrelevance. And they're also secretly, according to many people I speak to, I was in Brussels not so long ago at the European Parliament, and many people told me that there's a serious concern about Europe having to bankroll the dictatorship and their failing war. So this is all about trying to push, in one way, Zelensky towards some sort of deal, which he's been told on one hand by London, don't do, much like he was in 2022 by Boris Johnson, when this peace deal had been signed in Turkey. That was scuppered by Johnson because there's no political capital in peace or settlement in Ukraine. So it's the same now. The motivation is, we will stand with Ukraine for 1,000 years, but we'd rather the deal was done so we could get out of this, because we know we can't defeat the Russians on the battlefield. We can't defeat them economically, still buying their gas, still doing deals. So it's a very cynical move. What was discussed, we know one thing that was definitely discussed. Lip readers, this was published in the British media, said that Trump excluded Macron from this, and I tweeted this, excluded Macron from this tete-a-tete. There was 3 chairs put out. Trump said, look, I want you to sit this one out, step back. And what Zelensky is trying to do is build bridges. But everything Zelensky is going to say now is going to be, the snowball will be rolled in London and Brussels, handed to Zelensky and thrown by him towards Washington. There's a huge gulf in the ideas of the perceptions of a peace plan. Essentially what Ukraine and their newly found sponsors and paymasters in Brussels and London want is the winner on the battlefield. Russia's winning. It's just driven, as I say, the invasion force out of Kursk, the loss of probably 80,000 plus men, huge amounts of materiel and equipment, a completely wasted, idiotic escapade into Kursk. That's been completely defeated. That was meant to be the big bargaining chip, which allowed Ukraine to bargain for territory, which, again, on a daily basis, village after village, settlement after settlement, the Ukrainians actually believe that they can dictate terms to the advancing army coming towards them, towards the Dnieper, which is utterly ludicrous. No military strategist could defend that. It's a form of madness. And they're portraying this to the client media as a statement that we are willing to sign an unconditional ceasefire. That's like a heavyweight boxer, Tyson Fury, having your grandfather outside your pub and your grandfather saying to Tyson Fury, okay, I'll let you off now. I mean, it's just absolutely ludicrous.
Now, finally, Chay, I'm a big critic myself of so-called NGOs, non-government organizations, that very seldom stand up to scrutiny as being non-government organizations. If they're not funded directly by Western states, they're usually funded through a cutout. USAID gives money to George Soros, and he gives money to the non-government organization that, lo and behold, toes the line and carries the water for the Western state that was the originator of the funding in the first place. You've got a very important documentary coming out this week on this very subject. Give us a taster of what it is you'll be saying.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been a remarkable journey. And I think everyone's going to sort of really sit back and draw a breath when they see some of the stuff we're going to reveal. It's called War in the Shadows, and it's basically, it is what it says on the tin. It's about the huge amounts of money, cash, and political influence that's been dumped into countries, apparently to prop up democracy and stimulate the Western idea of democracy and open society, but they're completely non-democratic. I mean, the countries we're focusing on in this element of it, we've got probably going to do 3 parts. This is the first one. It's ready for release. We're going to release it this week. I'm going to release it completely free on X and on various other channels, so people will be able to watch it in full. We're focusing on Serbia and Georgia in this episode. I was in Georgia at the end of last year in November. I spent 10 days in the midst of the very aggressive attempts to overturn the election with, these completely unfounded allegations that Russia had stolen the election. What happened was the pro-EU, pro-NATO, pro-Ukrainian opposition lost, and they lost very badly to the Georgian Dream Party. So I was there to record that. Some absolutely fascinating video and interviews on the streets, which I'm not going to tell you, but if you're going to watch it, it's going to be fantastic. And of course, Serbia. I met and spoke with senior government officials, some people who were on the opposite side of protests. One of the things in Serbia, which is quite remarkable, is the fact that there's no EU, NATO, or Ukrainian flags to be seen whatsoever in these huge protests. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people. Both sides of the political disagreement despise NATO, and the EU's popularity is about 20% in Serbia. Serbia, a country surrounded by a lot of enemies. Everything we know about Serbia, much like Russia, has been told to us over the decades by people who hate Serbia and Russia. Don't forget that. And the traditional friendship and brotherhood between the Serbs and the Russians is at the center of the inconvenience of Serbia. It's like a stone in the shoe for the elites and the Western sort of aggressive attacks on Serbia. So we spent a lot of time there. We've done some great research, and I think it's really going to make people sit back and think. I'll give you a little example. There are over 200 British NGOs operating in Serbia. Hundreds of millions of pounds have been spent over the decades. One of them is called the Hansard Society. It was founded in 1944 to promote parliamentary democracy. Many of them, George, are churches. Now, Serbia is one of the most ancient Orthodox Christian societies on earth, if not one of the oldest of sorts. And it's a very devout country. They love their religion. Many of these NGOs are actually evangelical churches. Some are there to promote the conservation of butterflies, and some are spending 20,000 euros a day on taxis in a very relatively small city. So we went after the money. We're not there to get involved in the political discussion between the sovereign agreements and disagreements between the government, because we're not NGOs. We're there to follow the money and show people just how powerful this influence is and just how pernicious it can be. So I think it's going to be very worthwhile, and hopefully people will watch it and I can come back and tell you about it.